Welcome to Lifelong Learning. I'm Donna Faust, the club president. Please take a moment to silence your phones. As you can see, our members enjoy many benefits of membership. Our very talented video team records our presentations, which are then posted on the website. But you need to be a member to access them. So if you're not a member, our membership people are in the back. Last year, our presentations were viewed by over 1,700 members, and we're on the path this year to have even higher viewership. Before I tell you about our terrific program lineup, the association would like you to know that the views expressed by our presenters are those of the presenters and not ours or the associations or the clubs or anybody else other than them. Please remember to hold your questions until the end of today's presentation. We will have roving mics available for you. So let's begin. I'd like to present our program director, Juanita Brown, who will introduce today's topic and speaker.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. So nice to look out and see your smiling faces. As she said, well, I think probably most of you know Dr. Hrebenar, right? He used to be the president of the Current Events Club, and he's been presenting around here for a long time. He's an SCA resident. He is oh, sorry. Goodness sakes, I didn't realize how far I had it from my mouth. He's a well-known presenter. He has the credentials. He's a PhD in political science. He's a professor emeritus from the University of Utah. He's a published author and a recognized speaker around our community. And I'm just so very pleased that he's going to bring his expertise to us this morning for an interesting conversation. Dr. Hrebenar.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I really appreciate that. We're going to do a couple of things today. I have three topics that I'd like to address, but they broadly interact with each other. Now I have to get my various implements. This is going to be fun. I get to juggle three things. And
Okay.
That's the general topic, party realignment, which in political science talk really means, are we into a new era of political party dominance? And that'll be the central core of our discussion today. But I want to start with a more important topic. Did Taylor Swift have a really strong impact on this election? Now, some of you may remember last summer, Taylor came out and endorsed Ms. Harris, and there was great consternation in the land among some of the Republicans. The Democrats thought this was going to be great. So my question is there any evidence to indicate that she had an impact on the election? So this is one way of looking at it, and again, this is a humorous introduction, so I'm not going to give you the other 26 slides that I have prepared on this particular subtopic. But if you look at one thing here, which is young women voting in 2024, you see that 58% of them voted for Harris. Young women in 2020, 65% of them voted for Harris. This is not a good piece of evidence to indicate that Taylor Swift had a profound impact. You notice that among young men, only 42% voted for Harris. That number was 56% back in 2020. So there was a very substantial decline in the youth vote for the Democratic candidate in the 2024 election. So my conclusion is Taylor Swift did not have a profound impact on this election. I think she increased the party registration, or the people who were registering to vote, but they didn't come out to vote in large numbers. That was a problem. Okay, so these are the three topics that I'd like to address today. The first one is What happened in the 2024 election? I would use the phrase, what the heck happened, but that's part of my Navy background, so I'll try not to use that kind of language in front of a very conservative crowd here today. Did a large political earthquake occur? Was there a so-called critical election? That's political science talk as well, a critical election. And thirdly, is America ready for a woman president? And I did a deep dive into lots of little surveys and polls about whether the attitude of America is that supportive of having a woman president. We'll get to that one last. Okay, so what the heck happened? And my answer is, it's complicated. The difference between journalists and political scientists is that journalists have X number of words that they have to have in a column, and therefore they tend toward, this is the answer. Political scientists think in terms of 3-hour blocks, or articles that go on endlessly, or books that'll go on even longer. So we come up with all kinds of answers. We look at all kinds of variables, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run through 3 or 4 slides really quickly, because these are all the possible impact variables. For example, it was an anti-status quo plurality election. As one account put it, Harris was doomed from the beginning. We'll get into that a little bit more. 2024 was the first post-COVID presidential election. Millions of people were unhappy. A million died, but millions more were unhappy, and that continued to the 2024 election. Millions of people were unhappy about the so-called border crisis. Even if you lived in an area of the United States that wasn't directly impacted by the border crisis, people were unhappy. Politics of joy, that was Harris's central theme. It was perhaps inappropriate for a country that was unhappy. And to convince them they should be joyful was a tall task. And last but not least, a plurality of voters felt that Biden was a failed president, and Harris was too closely identified with him. It was the Biden-Harris ticket. And even after Biden was off of it, she could not escape the identity with Biden. So those were some of the more fundamental reasons. There's more. I'll quickly go through this. The Democratic Party vote for president was down 7 million votes. This was huge compared to Biden. 7 million votes fewer in 2024 for the presidential candidate. Trump increased his vote by 3 million. Oh, that's fairly normal, going from one election to another with the increase in the number of voters in the country. The Democratic vote decline was largely in the big cities, Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Phoenix, etc. Trump won more votes than Biden did in all 7 of the battleground states, including Nevada, of course, and we'll talk a little bit more about Nevada a little bit later. Democrats do better in midterms, which is the future for 2026. If I had to put money down, other than betting on Southern Illinois University Edwardsville to win the NCAA, my old alma mater's other campus, if I had to put money down on this election, on the 2026 congressional election for the House of Representatives, I would say, oh, it's a really good bet the Democrats are going to win. And we'll get into the details of that a little bit later. So Democrats do better in midterms. Republicans do better in presidential elections. Why? The simple answer is the peripheral voters, those people who are unattached to the electoral system, they're unattached to the news media. They show up for presidential elections, and we'll note that they were really quite decisive in 2024. These people don't show up for the off-year elections, for the congressional elections. So the Democrats do better. One of the old truisms about politics used to be, until this election, that if more people voted, the Democrats would win. That was always the thing. Let's get out the vote. Let's register everybody. It didn't happen this time, and it's unlikely to happen in the future because the electorate has fundamentally changed in terms of their behavior patterns. So, more reasons. Hey, good. You don't have to memorize these. There'll be no quiz later. Harris should have addressed the transgender issue. They talked about it. They agonized over it. They ignored it. It was not a clever move. Harris is for they, them. President Trump is for you. The famous TV ad, which incidentally, when you go to the post-election meetings with the consultants, the Republican consultants say that was the key. They believe that election advertisement, President Trump is for you, was the key to swinging that last group of voters over to them to give them the win. Okay, let's go down the list. Harris' campaign almost completely ignored the policy successes of the Biden administration. You can argue that they had some really big policy successes. Harris didn't talk about them. Didn't give the Democratic base a reason to come out and vote. Harris could not overcome the Trump assertions that the economy was a disaster and one of the worst in the world. If you read the Economist magazine, they claimed that the American economy was the best in the world. Trump said it was the worst. Harris just let it go. Harris assumed female, Hispanic, and big labor support. She really didn't get any of those three at the level that she needed to win the election. There was an assumption, because of abortion politics being important in the last off-year election, that it would be very important this time. It wasn't very important. It was important to a certain number of voters, but inflation was the dominant issue in this election. Worldwide, incumbent parties lost everywhere. Look at the poor Conservative Party in England, got hammered by Labor. That has been the case in Germany, France, Japan, everywhere. The incumbent parties in the post-COVID era have been hammered. We're down to this level. Oops, excuse me, I didn't need me to do that. I'll go back. See what happens when you have to do three? Little evidence that moderate Republicans were going to support Harris. You know, that was the hope, right? That Cheney and others would bring these reasonable Republicans to support. I'll show you a little bit later. There's almost no evidence of that occurring. A black, South Asian, ethnic background candidate faced some headwinds, obstacles. The combination was a tough one. Whoops, thank you. He's reminding me to speak into the microphone. I'll 1, 2, 3. I got it. Whoops. Trump failed assassination attempt. You notice I have this in yellow? When it occurred, I didn't think it was terribly important. After all, he got hit in the ear. When it occurred, I thought, oh, that's interesting. As it went on, and we began to look at subgroups in the population that were moving to support Trump, particularly among young males, it seemed more and more important. And my suspicion is once we get through the second, third, fourth attempt looking at the voting outcomes and the polling data, that this will become one of the biggest explanations about what happened in this presidential election. That the macho style, the fist in the air, the waving as he was carried off the stage really impacted a lot of marginal voters' thinking about what they wanted. And they wanted a strong leader. I'll show you data later on the idea of strong leadership being more important to those kinds of voters. And last but not least, the sitting vice presidential curse. I like that phrase. Only one, George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988, was elected directly from the vice president to the White House since 1836. In other words, you have a president, wins the first time, the president wins the second time, and then his vice president runs again for the third time. We're tired of those guys. We want a change. We need a new leader. The vice presidential curse struck again. More. Like I said, we think in terms of multiple variables. I'll go through these quickly. Biden should not have run again. He should have dropped out earlier. Second, they should have dropped out earlier. Third, the Democrats should have had a different selection process, but it was too late in the game. They were stuck with the vice president. I understand that. A black woman vice president, how are you going to dump her? But it was unfortunate that they couldn't deal with a maybe more popular candidate. 105 days is not enough time to run a campaign when you're relatively unknown or you're relatively unpopular. It's a bad combination. Harris needed to do some press conferences and real interviews. She was reluctant to get into that kind of exchange type, and a number of people, or as Trump says, some people, a lot of people, everybody, thought that she wasn't looking presidential or strong enough. Harris needed a break with the Biden presidency. She was unable to do that. Psychologically, she was unable to do that. Relying on attacking Trump as unacceptable, a danger to democracy, didn't work. The Democrats hammered this issue. Democracy's in trouble. They're still hammering it, by the way, right? If you watch MSNBC on a daily basis, you'll know that they talk about that all the time, the threat to democracy, autocracy. And yet, a significant number of voters, many of them in the decisive last group of making up their minds, couldn't care less about democracy. It was all about the price of eggs and other such issues. So one of the central themes of the Democratic campaign fell on deaf ears. Too many voters didn't buy the danger of democracy. The late voters swung to Trump like they did in 2016. Let me talk about the Trump campaign for a couple of minutes here. It was strong, populist, anti-status quo, anti-establishment, on message, simple, direct, read the room well, angry voters wanting change. I can do the change. Only I can do that, said Trump. Time for a change was very important given the Biden administration was unpopular. The Democrats had dominated the last 20 years of American politics. They won the popular vote in 7 of 8 elections in a row. They had their time in office. It was time, literally, in many people's minds for a change. They argued the Trump administration was the good old days. That one was a hard one, and what they found out was that there is a great deal of amnesia, a good word, amnesia, among voters. They don't remember what happened 4 or 5 years ago. Many of them don't remember what happened a few months ago, and I have trouble with yesterday on occasion. But you understand this idea, the good old days. There was Trump. I remember he was president. Things were great then. Gasoline was cheap. We forgot about COVID, that part of COVID, but that's a different story. It's the economy, stupid. Trump celebrity endorsers. And now here's an interesting, the influencers, right? You've heard that phrase, influencers. Celebrity endorsements were much more effective in reaching their targeted audiences than the Democrats. Well, who did the Democrats have? They had Beyonce, Obama's, Cheney, Taylor Swift, Bill and Hillary, Hulk Hogan, Joe Rogan, Musk. You want some Hulk Hogan stories and Joe Rogan? Okay, let's go to that. Here we go. The Rogan interview with Trump watched 37 million times on YouTube. 37 million times. Make America Great PAC had a list of 6 million streaming persuadables, another good word, that were targeted over and over and over again by text messages and mailings. 4 million low propensity voters and 3.5 million inactive voters. You see who they were targeting? The marginals, those people who only show up once in a while. And in an election as close as this was a very close election. We'll get to that in a minute. Nevada. Harris paid $1 million a week to put her face on the Sphere. How many of you saw her face on the sphere? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's more than me. I never saw it on the sphere. $1 million a week. And the sphere message was one word: vote. Vote. That was the Harris $1 million a week effort here in Nevada. What did Donald Trump do? Trump had billboards on I-15 and the highways with the message, "President Trump is for you." And the big one was, "No tax on tips." Who is he aiming at? The Hispanic vote. The Hispanic vote working in the casinos. No tax on tips. So you get one says vote, and you get the other one has a aimed, focused message. Final week focus. Trump had 50 unique ads across the country. 50. Harris had 162 different ads. There was no focus, there was no theme to whom she was trying to communicate with. Okay. I mean, that's kind of preliminary information about what the election is. We can talk about any of those points, but let me talk about my central theme here, which is party realignment. And incidentally, this is a Republican convention from the 1880s. Those were the good old days, right? What is a political realignment? A political realignment means every 30 years or so in American history, there was a so-called critical election. A critical election means, bang, this election is big, it has changed behavior, there's a new dominant party, the old party has been destroyed or at least severely weakened, and we're in a new era of politics. That's a good summary of what a critical election is. And I think I can move on to this one, which is there have been 5-party systems. This is political science history. Bear with me. Grit your teeth. It'll be over soon. Don't worry. 5-party histories in the United States. Notice 1800, 1828, 1860, 1896, and 1932. Hi. 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. Oh, dear.
That was symbolic.
That was symbolic, Chuck? Here. Hold this.
I'll hold it.
I'm going to reassemble my modern technology.
And I'm not going to say a word.
Don't say a word. Whoa. Ah! It doesn't reassemble as eaten. Well,
Looking good.
yeah, don't worry about the laser. I'm going to hand it to Chuck.
Not a good thing.
Not a good thing? All right. This shows flexibility, by the way. Okay, so. Okay, there we go. What happened in the 1930s to now? The last realignment was in 1932. It's been every 32 years throughout our history. A new party system emerges. What happened since 1932? Well, my suggestion to you is that there was a realignment. We didn't notice it. What occurred roughly 32 years later in 1964. In 1964. What happened in 1964? 1964 was the Goldwater year against Lyndon Johnson. The Democrats the Democrats have been like a dinosaur. The comet hit, the climate had changed, they were still living, they were still munching around, they were dead. They just didn't know it. And in 1964, the world had significantly changed because of what? The answer is, at that time, civil rights. The Lyndon Johnson administration changed the game in America by shifting the Democratic Party to supporting civil rights of blacks and other minorities in American society. Within 20 years, the solid Democratic South had changed. And today, it's hard to find a Democrat. Yeah, 2 Democratic senators in Georgia. What else is left in the South? Almost nothing. So the new party system started gradually. We call it a rolling realignment rather than a sharp critical election break realignment. And in 1964, the world began to change. But what we got out of it was, and if I move on to the next slide, the dominant party, there's a new voting issue usually. We don't have a new voting issue. That's why we have what I'm going to call flip-flop elections. We go from one election to another. We throw the incumbent party out. 3 presidential elections in a row, we have thrown the president out. So we don't have a powerful dominant party. What we have are 2 parties that are really evenly matched. So, in terms of dominance, the highlighted part, we're in a tideless era. It goes one way, goes the other way. Thank you. So, what happened here in 2024? Notice the Democratic line, 95% of Democrats voted for Harris. Notice the Republican line, 94% of Republicans voted for Trump. 95. The party base is solid. Those who vote, I mean. Close election, there's the margins. This is last-minute undecided voters in 2016 voted for Trump. 11% more, 17% more Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, 29% of the last-minute voters shifted to Trump in Wisconsin. What happened here in 2024? Those people who made their mind up before September, it was almost 50-50, and that was 80% of the voters. 50-50 before September. Notice in September and October, Harris got most of the people who made their mind up. September and October, Harris was surging. We're getting people moving in their direction. But in the last week and the last few days, they broke to Trump. These are the marginals. These are the people who are disconnected to the political system, who make up their mind in the last minute. This was a very close election. 49%, 50%, 50%. This election could have been won by Harris. It could have been won by Harris. But in the last-minute voters, many of them, a plurality, shifted to Donald Trump. Here's what the House of Representatives looks like. When I show this to foreigners, like when I'm in Japan, I show this to foreigners, they go, oh my God, the Republicans win landslides. This is kind of symbolic of the Trump landslide mandate assertion. Look at that, the whole country is red. Those rabbits are red. What I mean is you got lots of land, nobody lives there. There's the trends which occurred in this election. All those arrows are increases in Republican votes. Wow. And my point here is there's a total House vote, 146 million votes. 7,000 votes cast differently. The Democrats are in control of the House of Representatives. 7,000 out of 146 million. The Democrats control the House. Huge urban shift away from Biden-Harris in 2024. And Republicans end up with a net loss of 2 seats. Donald Trump claims this is the greatest triumph ever in American history. It's a huge mandate. You don't have a huge mandate when you lose 2 seats in the House of Representatives and you only control by 5 seats. That's not a mandate. There's mandates on the bottom. Ronald Reagan, Clinton, even Bush or Obama, those are mandate elections. This was not a mandate election. So the Democrats had 20 seats to defend. The Republicans took 4 seats away. There's the total Senate vote. The total Senate vote the Democrats won in this country. More people voted for Democratic senators than voted for Republican senators in the U.S. last year. That is not a mandate for Republican leadership. Trifecta. Grover Cleveland. You remember Donald Trump says, we're the first time that a president is coming back after he lost the election. You know what happened to Grover Cleveland? His party was smashed in the next election. Smashed. In the election of 1896, William McKinley, who was incidentally Donald Trump's favorite president recently, William McKinley proceeded to lead the Republican Party for the next 30 years. He wasn't alive for that whole time. Of course, he was assassinated, but the Republican Party dominated the country. Only one Democratic president was elected in that 30 years, Woodrow Wilson, the first political scientist and only political scientist to be elected president of the United States. So, trifectas are terrible. The president almost always loses the House of Representatives 2 years later. And that's the history of that. What will happen in the next presidential election? Probably a Democrat will win in 2028. But 2032 is the big change. What happens in 2032? Millions of Americans have moved from Democratic states to Republican states. 9 million in the last 20 years. Because of that population shift, the number of House seats is moved from Democratic states to Republican states. And in fact, 12 electoral votes are going to be shifted to Republican states. 12, and you can see Texas gets 4 more electoral college votes. Florida gets 3 more. California loses 4. New York loses 3. Illinois loses 2. That's the equivalent of a new state being created that's going to vote Republican. 12 votes. So what does that do to the last electoral, what does that do to the last electoral equation? You remember how Harris was going to win? She wins Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and 1 obscure electoral vote from Nebraska. She has exactly 270 electoral votes. She's the president. She can't, whoever the Democratic candidate is in 2032, they can't do it that way. That plan is out the door. That's the change that's going to be really dynamic in 2032. Okay, next issue, last. Good, I still have 7 minutes left. I see your watchful eye, though. As they say at the NBA drafts, you're on the clock, right? Okay, will the U.S. ever be ready for a female president? And I chose this as a topic because a number of people have asked me about that particular topic. So let's go and let's see what happens here. Jennifer Rubin, after this last election, Washington Post columnist says, a female president is a bridge too far for millions of voters who resent their advances and autonomy. Now that's a political opinion. Okay, any data to back that up? Any data? So, this is the fine print, but in 1937, the American public was asked for the first time by Gallup, would you consider voting for a president if she was qualified in quotation marks in every other respect? Can you imagine being qualified in every other respect? And at that time, only 33% of Americans said they would vote for a woman if she was qualified in every other respect. Now, that was 190 years ago, right? So things must have changed significantly, and they have. Here's a 538 poll that says, would you vote for a woman for president? And that comes out of Gallup. You can see there has been a steady upward, up toward 90% of people who say, yes, they would vote for a woman president. You see a little downward, a dip there in the last 10 years going down. Why would that be? Well, you had Hillary Clinton was a candidate, and then you have Harris as a candidate. So the theoretical question became less important. It became a practical question. All right, let's go on more. This is interviews with the Washington Post focus groups. The wording is, voters express subconscious bias and outright sexism, worried that a female president might be too emotional, or that she would be weak, or she'd get rolled by male leaders on the world stage. They couldn't imagine handling nuclear codes to someone they fear may be movie while menstruating. What I'm suggesting to you is that there might be a little underlying bias here among the voting public. let's go on. Do women really want a woman president? Most recent poll, more. Was that me? Okay. Most recent poll said more women said yes, 57%. Well, 21% of men and 22% of women said they do not personally hope for an elected woman president in their lifetime. Now, these are the kind of polls that you don't see, right, normally on the media. You got to really dig deep to find these kinds of questions. A third of Republicans say a woman president would make the U.S. less respected globally. Note, for example, 15% of Democrats agreed with that. 15% of Democrats agreed that a woman would be less respected internationally. I think they fail to notice that there are some really good women leaders around the world. That's a small detail. This is a small data set, but the one that I want to point, is that me or can't be me? I'm better than that. Look at the bottom line. Trump voters. They voted for Donald Trump because Harris is a woman was a major reason I voted for Trump. Harris is a woman is a major reason I voted for Trump. Note the various groups. 7% of men, 5% of women. The young people, 18 to 39-year-old, 9%. 11% of males, 18 to 39. You can see a little bias toward the male side. And this is an interesting poll. This is of Asian Americans. And you can see across there, Chinese, Indian, Filipino, Korean, Vietnamese, Japanese, etc. And there's that same question, that Harris was a woman was a major reason I voted for Trump. Good grief. Notice 6. Hi there. I don't think this is me. Yeah. Notice if you look at the bottom line, Harris is a woman, the major reason I voted for Trump. Notice 1% of Koreans, Americans, was in that category, but the others are 6, 7, 8, 9%. So there is an indication of bias there. This is 80% of Republican men believe society as a whole has become too soft and feminine. And you see it's Republican women, 67% who agree to that, Republican men. Even among Democratic women, 14% think the society has become too soft and feminine. Oops. And here's one of my favorite ones. Look on the bottom, 17%, including 20% of men and 15% of women say women should focus on running their homes and leave running the country to the men. Ah, the good old days, huh? Okay, so this is Matt Bye from the Washington Post columnist. Yes, America will elect a woman. At some point, the right woman will break through the ultimate glass ceiling. Finally, another interesting question, will the first woman president be a Republican? Bill Clinton, on the bottom from Politics, predicts the USA is likelier to elect a woman if she's a conservative Republican woman. So, where did I get that? This is a question on gender. Could women be an effective leader? Among Republicans, 16% of registered Republicans say they either disagree or strongly disagree with the idea that a woman could be an effective political leader. Among Democrats, it was only 1%. But it's the Republicans who will not support that position. So, what does the data indicate? Now that I've quickly gone through and I look at that exactly on 40 minutes. Oh my God. 2024 was not a realigning election. If there was a realigning election, it occurred in 1964 and has been a gradual, slow, glacial-like change in our politics, which ends up with two almost evenly balanced political parties, which flip-flop back and forth depending on what the issue that year is. Secondly, 2032 will be a more difficult year for the Democrats to win the presidency. They have a better chance in 2028. 2032 could be really tough. And maybe America's not quite ready yet for a woman president. And finally, Taylor Swift could not bring the Kansas City Chiefs the championship or Harris the presidency. I thank you for your attention. Open for questions. Thank you very much.
Questions?
So if I've just followed your presentation, it could be summarized a little bit that the issues 2024 election came down to messaging, imaging, and issues.
Well, that's pretty generic.
Well,
If there was a single issue, it was inflation, 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 and the bad economy. You see it in now the current polling of the Trump administration's chaos. People are annoyed, including many Republicans, that the economic issues are not being dealt with. All the other issues were secondary to inflation and the nature of the economy and the price of eggs.
Next question.
Question?
Oh, thanks, Ron. Appreciate it very much.
Don't lose my pointer.
Now, I have your device here.
Thank you.
Regarding the changing demographics, the geographical changes, what evidence is there that these people who are moving from places like California and New York are taking their democratic politics with them to Texas and Nevada and wherever they're moving? Or are they basically Republicans who are upset with the Democratic failures in their given states and they want to go to some place where they can afford to buy a house and whatever?
Yeah, good question. Are these people who are leaving California, for example, and moving to Nevada, are these the Republicans that are leaving and escaping from Gavin Newsom, or are they people who are maybe open to supporting Democratic candidates here? And the short answer is it's too soon to see that. The long-term answer is you're beginning to see a pattern like in the state of Florida, which has become more and more Republican as incoming migration has come into the state. But even more significant than that, and can I jump ahead to something? Oh, all the way to the end. No? This is extra stuff. See the red over here? Look, Hispanic. You see Hispanic on the left side there? Liberal, moderate, conservative is Hispanic. This is the swing from 2020 to 2024 and from 2016 to 2020. Notice moderate and conservative Hispanics and Asians voted for Donald Trump in large numbers. And that change started in 2016. So you're dealing with more than migration here. You're dealing with a cultural sophistication among Hispanic and Asian voters that they're less likely to vote their ethnic identity and more likely to vote their political ideology and their income. So there's so many things operating there. It's hard to pick out which one is the change, but certainly Texas, Florida, those states, Arizona, are becoming more Republican, and Nevada becoming more Republican as these kind of demographic changes occur, as people move in from other states. I don't see a trend that's favoring the Democratic Party. All the trends are favoring the Republican Party.
Other questions?
No, I'm not going to touch that.
My personal issue, I'm a New Yorker, basically lived and worked my whole life in New York, so I've been exposed to the Honorable President, Mr. Trump, as being a criminal, basically. What effect does that have on the population of this country when you have a convicted, by his peers, of felon? And he's, right now, he's still a convicted president of the United States. How does that impact the population in general who never look at anything but whatever or nothing?
I think there's two parts answer to the idea that the president is a convicted felon, and how does that affect the future of our politics. The first one is the Republicans don't care. I mean, they just push that one off the side. The second one is most of the swing voters, the so-called swing voters, they don't care. It's not an important issue for them. And for those who really think it's important, most of them probably watch MSNBC on a regular basis. And they're solid Democratic voters. I think, let me take your question and build it a little bit bigger than that. Trump. This is the era of Trump. I mean, whether you like it or not, you're in the era of Trump. One party has nominated the same person 3 times in a row, and he's won twice. Unheard of in American politics. We are in the era of Trump. So the question is, will Trumpism, good word, Trumpism, will Trumpism survive the next 3 years? And it's chaotic. I was watching a focus group yesterday on MSNBC of 10 voters in Michigan, all voted for Trump, and they were not happy. And if this chaos continues, and we're early in the term. I mean, this is only the first few months of this term. We have, it was the other day, it was 1,300 days left. Can you believe that? But if this continues and builds momentum, this could either make or break Trumpism. Either he will go on to build a Republican Party that dominates the next 25, 30 years, or it will crash and burn. And then if that happens, the burden is on the Democratic Party to get their act together and to figure out who they are and what they want to do, with none of those they've done so far.
Thank you, Ron. There is one area where I think that we have a concept, and that was that the Latinos that are coming as refugees are going to vote for the Democrats. That refugees, and then also from Europe. And my experience was always that the Latinos are a lot more conservatives because of religious stuff, and they will vote Republican. Is there any? Am I wrong?
This is a table. That's not a table, it's a graph, on what happened to those counties that had heavy immigrant populations. One of the new pieces of information that just came out 2 days ago is that Trump won naturalized citizen voters born outside of the United States. That question of these people who have come in from other countries, Trump, and there's the graphic on that, Queens, New York, Nassau, New York, Miami-Dade, et cetera, and that heavy red is the Trump vote, that Trump did better than Harris among those people. That's something we did not expect. And I agreed that was the conventional wisdom, that these new immigrants would be more likely to be Democrats. See, Trump is always complaining about, the immigrants come in, the Democrats want new voters, so they're going to make them American citizens right away, and they'll vote automatically for the Democratic Party. It doesn't work that way. These new immigrants voted for Trump, and they voted for change, and they voted for lower prices and to make their life better. Yes?
Do you think there are going to be free and fair elections in 2026?
There's a big story in today's RJ, in the Sun part of the RJ, about the changes that the Republicans are trying to pass in this new voting act that basically requires you to have a passport or a birth certificate to do almost anything, to register to vote, et cetera, et cetera. And that, honestly, if you look at, my specialty is state legislatures. I've been studying state legislatures for 50 years. I am not a big fan of state legislatures. There are some of the nuttiest people in the world who have leadership position in state legislatures across this country, Democratic and Republican. But the bottom line is there are some really radical, mostly Republican ideas about how we change our democratic process. And I think this is very dangerous. Now, whether the next election, 2028, will be an undemocratic small d, so undemocratic election. I don't think we've reached that stage yet, but we've certainly seen some backsliding away from what we assume to be normal elections in America.
Do you believe that the driving force and the urgency of Trump and his mega followers to win this election was to keep him out of prison?
The motivations of Donald Trump.
Got one over here.
What drives this man? My personal opinion, after having watched him for so many years, is that he is driven by a need for attention. He's driven by a need for affection and respect and for dominance against other people and other institutions, and that all of this combined with quite simply, if he had not run for president, there would have been no legal suits by the federal government against him. I believe that. I believe they would have just said, all right, Trump is done, let's move on. Running for president, he made a conscious decision. So I think he made a conscious decision that I can win. I will certainly win. I'm quoting him. I will certainly win, and therefore all the legal suits will disappear. And what happened? They all disappeared. It was incredible. Justice disappeared once you have political success. So I don't think that was the central motivation. I think it was driven by his own psychological needs for respect, attention, dominance, and then the legal thing was on the side. Personal opinion, I'm sorry.
Go.
Yes. Hi, Ron. Thank you. That was very, very illuminating. So really enjoyed your talk. Just 3 quick comments. The 2002 book, The Coming Democratic Majority, Judas and Texera, they were, of course, talking about demographic and social changes that would favor the Democratic Party for decades. Is that something that is in question at this time, or is that theory still in vogue?
Yeah, the 2002 book he's referring to is The Emerging Democratic Majority, which was a play on words on Kevin Phillips' old book from decades earlier on the Emerging Republican Majority back in the Nixon years. It was based largely on the demographic changes in society. As the older voters who were Republican disappear, let me use the word disappear, off the voting rolls, to be replaced with younger, more likely to be Democratic voters. I was reading a set of polls yesterday, and it was Kevin Kline in the New York Times interviewing this Democratic pollster who basically said the greatest shock in the 2024 election was young people voting for Trump in much larger numbers than anybody thought possible. Young people, young males 18 to 24 years old. Young females, too, in lesser numbers. But the pollster was shocked by that. He said, we never thought we would see that, and that it indicates a real fundamental change. And why? Their sources of information have completely changed from what it had been in previous decades. In previous decades, people read newspapers. They watched CBS, NBC, ABC, Evening News. Now, what's their number one source of information? TikTok and so-called influencers. Yeah, these are people, many of them without a high school education, that are somehow influencing millions of young people. That has changed the world completely in terms of that group, demographic group, and the Democrats thought they could rely on that group for the next 10, 20, 30 years. They can't.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
You mentioned that at least part of the population, there's an appeal for a strong leadership, especially around young males. And I was actually just reading this morning an article about the Supreme Court, and I was very surprised to learn about that professor of Harvard called Adrian Vermeulen. I don't know if you heard of him, but he seemed to have an extremely illiberal and pro-authoritarian vision of the Constitution. And it surprised me coming from a professor of Harvard. And so I was wondering, in your opinion, or from what you read, is there an appetite or an increasing appetite for illiberalism and authoritarianism in the U.S.? Is that a trend?
So the question is there a growing appetite for authoritarian-style leadership in America? And I think the answer is yes, but we're not unique. We're like almost every developed country in the world. And let's face it, the last 20 years have been so difficult. Going back to the financial crisis of 2008, the wars that we've been in, the wars, Ukrainian war, most contemporary, the Israeli-Hamas war, raging inflation, and the status quo. See, that was another problem that Harris had. She was defending the status quo. It was indefensible. It was hard to defend the status quo when so many people were unhappy, and the unhappiness covered so many different areas, so many different directions of unhappiness. So the question is, do people search for a strong leader? Well, historically, yes, they did. Hitler, Mussolini, being the 20th century, people who stepped up when their economy was a wreck, when things were tough. It's not hard to understand why people who feel a certain level of desperation are looking for somebody who looks them in the eye and says, I will defend you. I will solve the problems. Now, I'm sitting there listening to the same speech saying, no, you can't. That's unlikely. In fact, you look like a very dangerous person. But the average person who's looking for something to hold on to is willing to suspend that degree of suspicion and to vote for those kind of people. And it's not hard to understand what happened in 2016, 20, and 24 in terms of why Trump got so many votes. One slide I didn't show you was the American Political Science Association Presidential Scholars section of just people who spend their whole lives studying presidents concluded that Donald Trump was the worst president in American history. 100-point scale, 13. Nobody even close to him. Even the terrible presidents before the Civil War were all significantly higher. We knew that. The voters basically didn't care. They were either uninformed or resistant to information and were willing to take a chance. I know so many people who said, hey, give him a chance. See what happens. Let him shake things up. See whether it works or not. That's the answer, I think, to your question. They're willing to take a chance when they feel that sense of desperation or unreasonable pressures.
Last question over here.
Oh, last question. I have like 12, but given that last response, I could go a couple of different directions. Oh, I'm over here.
Gotcha.
Sorry. Okay. I'll go with my original. Given Citizens United, Congress's inability to deal with money and politics, and the Supreme Court's inability to deal with gerrymandering, do you see a trajectory that is positive? I mean, we have, when you pulled up the slide on the Senate, if you look at the senators, even though they're in the minority, they represent the majority of the people. When you look at the districts in the House that are specifically designed so that they can go one way or the other, primarily Republican, if that's not taken care of, it's just going to continue to divide, and it's going to continue to go on that same trajectory, which isn't going to be a positive one, especially given the Electoral College.
Wow. I love people who know the problems of our political system. I mean, as a political scientist, for 50 years, I have been talking about the fundamental defects of our political system. Just throw one on top. Every state gets 2 senators, whether you have a state full of rabbits or 40 million people. It makes no sense. And the Founding Fathers knew that they had to make decisions in 1787, and those were political decisions. We have not fixed it. We have not solved those problems. And the gerrymandering in the House, the Supreme Court basically said, we don't care. Well, let the state legislature solve the problem of state gerrymandering. They're the problem. The The Senate, the fact that a majority of the Senate represents 30-some, 20-some% of the population. Fundamental problem. We don't solve it. The Electoral College was designed to have 40 or 50 old guys, white guys, gather together in their state capital and pick the president. It didn't work then. It doesn't work now. We should dump it. Everybody else, every other democracy in the world that uses a presidential system does it on direct popular vote, except us. And did I mention we don't use the metric system? That's irrelevant.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We're out of time now. Next week, the discussion group will be talking about politics in America. So
thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was really good.
My pleasure.
Wonderful.